This is Yesterzine, the monthly magazine show about monthly magazines. We take a magazine from the golden age, play the games they liked most and least, and then flip through to find out what gaming was like when Amiga magazines combined sold about 500,000 copies a month in the UK. And from the group of those magazines, there are 3 fairly famous gaming-focused ones. This show has basically told the whole story of Amiga Power, including a trilogy of their 3 biggest scandals, culminating in a dramatic reconstruction of their infamous Viking funeral issue. We started the entire show with an issue of The One, my first Amiga magazine, and we also looked at the sad decline of it under Maverick Magazines, the vampire publisher. But, barring one entertaining special, we've not looked at the third and longest lived of them. Amiga Action began as an Amiga-focused title before the other 2, and survived beyond them. The general perception in hindsight, though, is this was not a particular indication of its quality. The aforementioned special concerned them rating Rise of the Robots 87 percentage points higher than Amiga Power did. And without wishing to spoil that if you've not seen it, Amiga Power were right. We should though give the title a chance, and being fair-minded folk, we're giving it the best one possible. Amiga Action issue 36 came along in September 1992, with the Amiga flying high. The Gaming Heaven is a classic I've never played, from a developer whose most famous product you will all know. The Gaming Hell is, well, it's football. Did it get a bad mark because Kickoff and Sensible already existed at this point, or is it just that bad? And elsewhere we look at the company that looked at CD-based interactive movies and decided what that really needed was to be crammed onto floppy disks instead. But first, an immediate win for Action. In the August 1992 issues, both The One and Amiga Power had posted an intriguing cheat for Team 17's awful but bloody great music shoot-em-up Project X. The premise being that if you could somehow fly right down the throat of the first boss, then you would get a bonus little Space Invaders style minigame. The fact that neither of them managed to post a screenshot of this might well tell you what's coming next. But certainly, neither of them bothered verifying it, because, as Amiga Action point out here, it didn't exist. They made it up as a honey trap, and it worked splendidly. Amiga Power fans would probably like it to be known this is early Amiga Power, before the magazine's philosophy and personality had fully worked itself out. But in charge of the cheat section at the time was Jonathan Davies, who would come to be known as the Gentleman Editor. He was last seen on this show being pushed off a roof during Amiga Power's final issue, so he really should have done better. The One's excuse would probably be along the lines of, "I say, look over there," and the sound of running footsteps. So with an early goal in the back of the net, a metaphor I'm setting up now in case it's useful for when we get to that football game in about 20 minutes, we quite literally premiere the Gaming Heaven. PlayStation gamers will recognise core design from their most famous product, Blam Machine. No, it's this woman. Tomb Raider appeared in 1996, and as often happens when a developer finds a standout series, Core basically produced nothing else for the next 7 years, until the failure of the 5th mainline Tomb Raider game prompted new owners Eidos to take the ball away from them and everyone of note to leave the company. But in the corresponding 7 years before Tomb Raider, they produced some generally acknowledged classics. I'm vocally not a fan of Rick Dangerous for reasons we haven't got time to go into now, but the legally distinct from Indiana Jones platformer was certainly critically acclaimed and technically accomplished. Lara, who is not unrelated to Indiana Jones, may have taken inspiration from this period too, although main creator Toby Gard was not yet working for Core. Core also gave us Amiga favourite Chuck Rock, which was released for pretty much everything. Lotus Challenging Racer, Jaguar XJ220. They also published 3 of the 4 games by developer The Eighth Day, medieval role-playing games Heimdall and Heimdall 2, and this is where I get to the point, Premiere. So here's the intro, and as you might guess, there's a film theme. Core are fully leaning into that here, as explained in one of their trademark lovely intros. Core did seem to have this nailed during this period. Thunderhawk from the last season of Yesterzine was one of theirs, and that has a similar expansive intro, and a similar annoying inability to boot straight to the title screen once you've seen it. Still, gives us time to talk plot. You're a movie editor in crunch time. The night before the premiere of an unstated movie, you fall asleep finishing off some last-minute fixing of Chris Hemsworth's CGI hairstyle. During the night, your competitor studio sneaks in and really steals the steel reels containing the film. You wake up to a call from Ian Films, who reminds you the premiere is in 3 hours, and rather than calling the authorities, you peel off in your wheels to the competitor studio, without even stopping for a meal in your zeal to try and re-steal the steel reels and deal some feels to your dastardly foes, keeling anyone who gets in your way before showing them a clean pair of heels. So many takes. The game itself is at heart a shooty platformer, but I'm underselling it rather with that. It's more of a strategic and mild puzzle affair, and as with Rick Dangerous, if you look closely, I think you're going to see where some of Tomb Raider's ideas might have originated. It's sort of 2.5 dimensions. Not only can you jump between 2 depths on each screen, the game takes place in both front stage and backstage on each of its 6 movie genre themed levels. You switch between the stages via doors, and you'll need to do so to make progress in levels that are initially confusing but are actually fairly linear. What begins confusing, and remains so, are the controls. Core crammed all of the above plus your weapon onto a 1-button joystick, meaning we're in the always irritating time of up to jump that annoyed Amiga Power so. Worse, switching between tracks requires down and fire, frequently resulting in accidentally firing and only working if you're pretty accurately positioned. You may notice in this footage from one of my early goes that I am very often grabbing the wrong control, and it wasn't just me. A complete playthrough by AI82 that I've been referring to makes those mistakes fairly constantly too. Luckily, Premiere is rarely a fast-paced game, but where it is, you can easily fat finger your way to doom. And don't try to dodge this by trying the CD32 version either, because at least on my disk image, the controls are the same. The CD32 pad has 6 buttons. This uses 1. The CD32 port, such as it is, came out alongside the budget version of Premiere. Despite coming on a CD, which would have been cheaper than Premiere's 3 discs, despite the fact that at the same time CDs were all but piracy-proof, and despite having absolutely no work done on it, they tried to get an extra $5 for it. I can't imagine why the CD32 failed. I tried to mitigate it rather by switching to WinUAE and configuring a joypad so jump and shoot could be on separate buttons, and this helped. But you still needed to remember down and fire is move track, when my brain really wanted it to be down and jump. Which of course it isn't, because on a joystick that's the surprisingly difficult to pull off combo of up and down. Configuring a button to do this largely worked, but resulted in accidentally firing some of my limited ammo more often than not. Once you get at least halfway competent with it, you can enjoy how technically lovely this is. The animation is cartoon-like, the music is excellent, and the main sprite has a dynamism to him that belies the awkward controls. The level designs are interesting too, although bear exactly sod all resemblance to anything studio-like. Movie studios do not traditionally have doors located a mile from their switches and large metal spikes sticking out of the floor. Or, for that matter, flying racial stereotype hats. The controls aren't the only frustration with Premiere though. While it takes some of the good ideas from its stablemate Rick Dangerous, it also steals one of the worst. Switches that look the same as the ones that open doors, but drop entirely undodgeable cactuses on your head which sap your health. And with restart points very far apart in this game, you can easily get unlucky and be killed through something you can only avoid via memorization of the level, rather than anything to do with skill. There is at least no particular repeat of Rick Dangerous's obsession with blind jumps. The game doesn't need it either. It's difficult enough already without cheap tricks. It's got multiple ways of failing you. Not only is there health, you also have a very stingy number of lives to complete the full game, and if that weren't good enough, there's a 3-hour time limit before the premiere, which constantly ticks down. It doesn't need it. Any one of those would have done for me, and I did take advantage of the cheat that at least allows you to remove the lives element. I do sound like I'm getting down on Premiere a little, and I don't mean to be. It's some sorted controls and possibly a dynamic map away from being really good. It's a shame it didn't get a proper console release in the same way just about all its high-profile stablemates did. Chuck Rock found its way to 10 systems. Heimdall is on Mega CD, as is Jaguar. Wolfchild from the same year is on Mega Drive, Master System and SNES. But Premiere stayed resolutely on machines with Amiga written on them, when both graphics and control needs couldn't scream SNES harder if it had a bad cold. And as such, should you play Premiere today? Absolutely you should, but maybe do it on a PC and use something like Joy to Key to at least give yourself buttons for jump and fire. Otherwise, it could just be a beautiful and imaginative exercise in frustration. Interactive movies, something of a pet love of mine. Or at least a pet love of mine now they're not costing me £40 a throw anyway. Maybe it's the point and click obsessive in me. Maybe it's the application of technology far beyond that of other games. And here's my favourite illustration of that. This is the original Mario Brothers game. The game Super Mario Brothers was a sequel to. It was released originally as an arcade machine and was available for purchase on the 14th of July 1983. And to be fair to Nintendo, this doesn't look bad for 1983. We're only 3 years past Pac-Man, for instance. This, though, is Dragon's Lair. It looks 2 decades newer, but is actually 3 weeks older than Mario Brothers. The secret, of course, is that Dragon's Lair is an interactive movie. The game was streamed off a Laserdisc, a large 1980s DVD equivalent, and you basically guided the action with the game-changing scene to try and show the results of said actions. It's a thin concept at best, and also not an especially forgiving one, but just look at it. Laserdiscs, and later their first console cousin the CD, were essential for this, of course. Video, even in standard definition, is pretty huge. One of the first home CD versions of this game was for the Philips CDI, where lack of gameplay was never really a reason for Philips to object to a release. It clocks in at 327 megabytes, or in Amiga land, the same as 372 discs, which is 3 more than Rise of the Robots used on an A1200. This, you will presumably have noticed by this point, is an Amiga episode. The Amiga was not initially blessed with CD storage, and while the CD-TV did exist by this point, everyone wished it didn't, including Commodore. So floppy disk was how Amiga games got released if you wanted to sell more than 4 copies. For other systems, the problem of converting Dragon's Lair was resolved in a more traditional way, by making a different game entirely with the branding. Software projects made a truly awful attempt on the Spectrum and similar machines. Platformers were made for NES and SNES. The Game Boy got the prize, as license holders Elite simply swiped an old, unrelated Spectrum game they had rights to and awkwardly rebranded it. You might expect the Amiga version would take the same approach, but your new heroes Readysoft weren't going to let that stand. They had a go at the arcade machine across a mere 6 discs. So here, mercifully hard disk installed, is how a play of Dragon's Lair usually goes. This looks like an intro, but it's the game. We walk along the bridge, we fall off, we get eaten. The solution here is basically a QTE without a prompt. You have to try and guess what the correct single control input is in time. I've no idea what it is in this footage, so I die 3 times trying stuff and it's game over. Dragon's Lair is picky with both input and timing, so it's really quite tricky going in blind. Hilariously, if you leave this version, it shows you what happens on the bridge sequence if you get it right, which helped me at least get past that. But that's it. That's the game. If you can work out and perform all the control inputs on a hard drive equipped system, then this £45 game can be completed in 3 minutes, 10 seconds. If you're interested in that, check the description and I'll post this video of I Am Ironclaw doing exactly that. Reception was mixed. It didn't help that the US price of the conversion was $60 over 30 years ago, which, yes, translated to a retail price of £45 in the UK, comfortably twice the prevailing price for a full-price MIGI title at the time. And it required 1 megabyte of RAM, which was certainly not universal on Amigas in 1990, so you could be buying that too. ST Amiga Format took leave of their senses and awarded it 92%. It's a shame Amiga Power weren't around yet to baffle at that one like they did for Rise of the Robots, and it was left to Format's direct competitor CU Amiga to be the voice of sanity at 34%. The main beef, understandably, was that despite that £45 price tag, it was only really half the game, with many scenes cut in order to cram what they could onto only 1/50th of the original storage size. The solution was a pseudo-sequel a year later. It cost another £45, and this time was only the 5 discs, that presumably being how much was left. But I have a working floppy image copy of this, so let me use it to demonstrate the other issue. I'll just click play now to start a scene loading. And while it does that, this semi-sequel added actual QTE prompts in easy mode to help you out. So we'll try it with those. The traditional problem with modern QTEs makes probably its first gaming appearance. You're spending the entire time looking at the prompts, so you don't actually watch the lovely video. You'll also notice it spends considerably more time loading the scene than you can possibly spend playing the scene. Did I mention this was £45? Or of course, if you wanted the whole arcade machine, did I mention this was £90 actual pounds? It's probably for the best Amiga format, perhaps out of sheer embarrassment, never reviewed the second half. So what's the relevance here? Well, after doing broadly similar work with the other Don Bluth arcade game, Space Ace, Readysoft, in this month's Amiga Action, promised the use of the same technology in order to make, well, let's not put too fine a point on this one, an actual video game. And this is the result: Guy Spy and the Crystals of Armageddon. And there's only one way to handle this. Join me in starting a game. We're using a CD-TV version here, but I've checked both. It's just the A500 version without disk swapping. The disk image is 5 megabytes. Well, the first scene out of apparently 13 is a standard shooting gallery. And yes, this is at least functionally something someone might recognise as a game. It's quite clever with the train running in front of people to give you a break and the enemies diving around, but it's also really hard. The spots you have to hit seem tiny and not entirely related to the position of the dudes. This is compounded by a cursor that at best I would describe as fussy. It kinda ruins it, along with the manual telling you exactly the wrong controls for actually making Guy move. The tiny hotspot though means it's basically impossible to shoot the dudes even on easy, unless I'm massively missing something, having read the whole manual. Thankfully there's a level skip cheat so we can look at the variety. The second level is a ride up a gondola where you have to shoot the dudes in the cab ahead before they can throw you a present of a lovely red stick with a fuse on it. There would actually be time for Guy to throw it back, but he doesn't appear to want to bother with that. Nor does he want to bother with sensible controls. It's sort of like an LCD game in that there's only a few places Guy can be, but he reacts with all the urgency of a customer care telephone helpline being answered at 5:59 PM. Inputs happen about a week and a half after you ask for them, so while it looks like I have all the time in the world to react to a dude lighting the dynamite, in reality, if it's got to that point, I've already lost. Level 3 is this bizarre Avoid the Woman minigame. Our hero apparently does not fight women, which begs the question why the villain doesn't just hire an all-woman goon army and save himself a fortune in funeral benefits. In any case, Olga here moves at the same pace you do, and is between you and the door. So again, I'm not sure what the solution is here other than to vaguely prance about in front of her like the world's worst mating dance, until she justifiably throws you through the wall. Which, on the bright side, does get you out of the cabin, which is all you were looking for in the first place. We'll look at two more. Skiing is a credible looking thing where you have to avoid the posts and the grenades coming from above. It still moves glacially though, and the grenades are really tricky to avoid. With practice this is probably doable, but given I have to type in the level select sheet and sit through the intro literally every time I do, I'm losing patience with this. I did have to try a fifth level though. The action moves abruptly to Egypt, where Guy gets himself stuck in a pyramid, as you do. It's a simple maze escape, although the advice the one Amiga printed to follow the jutting out blocks appears to be faulty. It does though give you time to appreciate Guy's walking animation, that looks like someone has made him wear electroshock underwear and is directly responsible for 5 of the 33% Amiga power gave this game. With controls that even semi-resembled something usable, there is something to Guy Spy. You can appreciate the effort, but unfortunately what they've actually achieved here is really the worst of all worlds. The need to incorporate gameplay and fit the thing on 5 discs means the cartoon graphics aren't half as nice or fluid as Dragon's Lair. You can see Bluth wasn't involved. So while it's not even got the eye candy, that has not been matched with an increase in gameplay. And so the nicest thing you can say about the whole game is that it's £15 cheaper than the Dragon's Lair ones were. Or a third of the price if you wanted a whole Dragon's Lair. That about did it for Readysoft. They resurfaced once more in 1995 with an honest-to-goodness CD-based interactive movie in Braindead 13, that from reviews learned absolutely nothing from anything since Dragon's Lair. I can't get off the first scene of this game even using a walkthrough, which, given it only uses directions and one of the PlayStation's fire buttons, is fairly poor. Readysoft sold out the next year to a film company, and in fact still exists. And if I gave you 100 guesses, you will not guess what the group they're now part of is responsible for. Go on, think of an unlikely show for the producer of cartoon Amiga games to now be involved with. Yeah. Although in a neat narrative type for this episode, the current Lara Croft is in Grey's Anatomy. There she is. Oh, and they own Peppa Pig as well. This one is a mystery. European Champions. Cruelly mocked in AA for being reviewed several months after the European Football Championships of 1992 and given a scathing review of 34%, does not in fact appear to exist. No, seriously. It's not on Lemon Amiga. It's not on Moby Games. The publisher, Idea Software, who were already at the end of their short life, are listed as publishing a football game, but it was the very different, actually quite reasonable in its day but quickly dated, Emlyn Hughes International Soccer. Much like the man himself by that point, now I think about it. The situation is complicated by the game you've been watching in the background, which is called European Champions, but was released by Ocean, rather than Idea, a year or so later. It got a pretty good reception. 54% better a reception than our Phantom game from Amiga Action, when they got to it. It's got a couple of neat tricks, including both this vertical view and a side-on one. Also, that rather nifty pre-CD commentary at the bottom there. Checking my incredibly comprehensive, entirely legal Amiga disc collection, the only version I find is the Ocean one. At this point, I'm not entirely convinced the one Amiga Action reviewed ever got released. It doesn't even bear a passing resemblance to this Ocean game. And nor is it Elite's European Championship 1992, which was also recently out and already basically forgotten. Neither Action nor the One bothered reviewing it, and neither shall we. So that's the episode buggered then, isn't it, lads? I'll have to go see what the second lowest game was and pretend I never noticed this one. A plan complicated by the mention in the intro and, you know, the last couple of minutes. Thus I just checked, and the second bottom full price game is this platformer Crazy Seasons, and that's also published by Idea. But finally the breakthrough came from, of all places, short-lived Bosnian magazine Amiga Style, who did a football roundup in their second issue at the end of 1992. They refer to a game called Championship of Europe, and the Bosnians in the room will already tell you the review damningly begins quite average football, and does not proceed in a manner that would suggest it deserves more than 34% from Amiga Action, a magazine that once insisted a game deserved 35% for working at all.
Quite average football. The view is from a bird's eye view. The players are bigger than in kickoff, but are graphically unfinished. And that there are almost none. Referee whistle, tumbling of the ball, and so on. The ball first sticks to the foot, then suddenly bounces off the player. Dog. The player you control is clearly marked with a large arrow. It is much more interesting if two players play. After each foul, the great referee and player are shown 100 times bored. You can choose any team from Europe. I think they're all listed. Of course, there are also the possibility of playing the European Championship.
So, could this be our game? It is. In my collection is a Championship of Europe marked as published by Idea. It's still not on Moby Games, but it is on Lemon Amiga. Finally, we found it. Next time someone tells you all YouTubers just get their information from Wikipedia, I would like you to defend me, please. And I'll need it, because that means that this game, which Amiga Action gave 34% and Amiga Power gave simply 4%, actually needs to be played. Wikipedia research is looking better all the time. First though, I simply have to take a chunk of time out of the episode to show you Championship of Europe's full intro sequence. Get a coffee, because this could take a while. There you go. No, that's it. The title screen leaps up for about 3/4 of a second and then it automatically goes to the main menu without touching anything. If anything, I applaud them for keeping it free of publisher logo, developer logo, middleware logo, developer's hairstylist cat's logo, but wow, that's quick. It's certainly no goal-scoring superstar hero. The interface is minimalist too. That 3 is the length of the match you want, but it actually takes you to what we'll optimistically call the options menu, which allows you to change the match conditions and, well, that's about it really. I guess how many control options do you really need when you're a joystick with one button only game? So we start the tournament mode, which is pretty much the game's only mode, and get drawn against the Republic of Ireland for a classic Derby international grudge match. The game tries to generate some atmosphere with the teams running out, but it's taking the colours from the kits, resulting in the rarely seen white and blue England flag in the stand. Also, this takes forever. Like the teams are running out socially distanced 29 years ahead of its time. That, I fear, is the only way this game is going to be 29 years ahead of its time. But first, we have to try and figure out why my team has gone mad and are running in seemingly random directions. The answer to that comes when I realise the mouse button is taking goal kicks. Almost every Amiga game assumes you have a mouse in port 1 and a joystick in port 2, because that is how everyone did it. This doesn't, and insists on a joystick in port 1. That fixed, we can play some game. The review in Amiga style was spot on in terms of ball control. The ball initially seems like it's going to be stuck entirely to your foot, like in most early football games, but then suddenly it isn't. More like a Sensi or kickoff, but without the ability of some of those games to trap the ball. It's unpredictable, and the game further seems to have players auto-kick a ball heading right for them without any input from yourself. I can see the theory about creating a dynamic and realistic looking game, but what it creates is not a game at times. At which point I get fouled by the opposition, resulting in one of the game's actually quite charming cutaway scenes of the referee getting annoyed. I'm about to take the kick when I notice the tiny dugouts. You can see my player here. He's not fitting in there, much less the entire coaching staff and substitutes. It'd be more cramped than your mum's nightly work schedule. At this point, you might have come to the other realisation I had. The timer is still ticking down. No one seems to mind I'm not actually taking the kick. I let the entire rest of the first half run out like this, and there's no time added on. The ref just immediately blows for half time, completely ignoring I wasted most of it doing absolutely nothing. This is a pretty fundamental flaw. If I was a goal up and this was the second half, I could guarantee myself a win by getting fouled and just sitting there. We start that second half, and it does have to be said, there is the basis of a decent game here. On a sheer technical level, it's rather nice. The scrolling is great, the players have every bit of the charm of those in Sensible Soccer, plus quite a lot more detail. There's actually very little wrong there, apart from the wonky controls, AI and ref. The trouble is those are quite serious flaws in a football game. The first goal I score is weird too, being created entirely by Route 1 and some dodgy AI code, as the goalie runs away from the ball, giving me a clear shot. And this isn't on easy. It doesn't appear to have an easy. I think this was rushed, given it was already late for the tournament it was supposed to cash in on, because we see another flaw. When the game stops for any non-foul dead ball situation, the timer stops. At least that fixes the running out of time bug, but it's also not what happens in football. The timer never stops in football. but the officials are supposed to add on time for stoppages. This disconnect with fouls is weird, you would think it would be the same code. The game is also a bit funky with how you change player, frequently doing so to one you're not looking at while the ball is in the air. It also doesn't have aftertouch, as the review stated. But I can't hate it. Someone was writing something fun here, and distinct enough from the twin titans of Sensible and Kickoff that it might actually have had a place. As it is, though, it's unfinished and not terribly well thought through. It's a strange episode, this, because Premier, Guy Spy and Championship of Europe couldn't be more different as games. But actually, all of them coincidentally could share the same review conclusion, that with a little more thought put into their controls, they would be dramatically better games. Despite all this though, the game as released deserves its crappy reviews, for the simple reason that Sensible existed and there's just literally no reason to have purchased this in that scenario. The game finishes and we trudge back in. The crowd doesn't. They keep going. I actually left the game for 4 hours to go have dinner. They were still going. Maybe they have nowhere better to be. Idea didn't survive a year after the release of this, and that's a shame because I'd have actually liked to see a sequel to this. Perhaps a World Cup 94 game, which presumably they would have released around mid-1995. As it is though, it's a footnote in a very crowded Amiga genre, but perhaps a glimpse into a very interesting game we never got to play. On the back page, Renesis, who you may have heard earlier. In reality, she doesn't know Bulgarian, that was just acting. But does she know how to drive? Absolutely. Streamer of project cars and European trucks, and racer of anything with wheels, at least at the start of a race, Rain is a good time. Check her out on Twitch today. Or Monday. Monday's good. For us, we're off to see if that crowd is still there. Do a subscribe, do a like, do a watching the other videos that'll appear on screen, and we'll see you next month. Ta-ra!